Unitarian minister Theodore Parker was a big deal back in the mid-1800s. Most Sundays, his sermons would draw crowds of 3,000 people to gather in the Boston Music Hall. UU historian Dean Grodzins imagines the scene like this. He describes, "You are not used to seeing black and white folks, laborers, merchants, and the threadbare foreign scholars sitting side by side. But a wave of silence starts from the front of the hall. Reverend Parker has come in. He is a small man, plain-featured with a high forehead, dressed in a carefully tailored dark suit. His sermon lasts exactly an hour. Although there is a scriptural text quoted at the beginning, you quickly realize there is to be no exposition of it. It is only to be used as a motto. His oration about how our goal in life should not be pleasure, fame, or wealth, but perfect wisdom, justice, love, and holiness is stirring." Theodore Parker is one of our Unitarian Universalist prophetic voices, having preached on not just moral codes for living our best lives, but also a vision of what our Unitarian faith could be. Reverend Parker served our faith over 100 years before the Unitarians and the Universalists merged into one denomination. And he was a pretty controversial figure in his day, preaching that women deserve to have the same rights of, quote, body and spirit, mind and conscience, heart and soul, as men have. He argued that not only should women be allowed to vote, but we should have the right to become doctors and lawyers and ministers. That was over 100 years before women's suffrage. Theodore Parker was known for being an abolitionist, and while he spoke strongly against slavery, I hate to tell you, but he was also a white supremacist. Our heroes are always flawed and often contentious, but Theodore Parker remains a central figure in the evolution of our faith despite his ignorance about racial equality. He was the youngest of 11 children, and he grew up in a farm in Lexington, Massachusetts. He was a child prodigy, self-taught, able to read 20 languages by the time he was 27 years old. Now, he couldn't afford to go to Harvard, so he taught himself the material at home and traveled to the campus for exams, and they awarded him a degree. Parker went on to graduate from Harvard Divinity School, and he was ordained in the Unitarian tradition in 1837, when he was called to serve a small parish in West Roxbury, Massachusetts. Now, Parker was one of the transcendentalists of his time. Like Ralph Waldo Emerson, he explored nature-based Christianity and questioned the divinity of Jesus Christ, and he questioned whether the New Testament miracles really happened. Parker believed and preached that the Bible is full of myths and denied that it had any miraculous authority. He said, quote, "I preach abundant heresies, and they all go down, for the listeners do not know how heretical they are." This is bold heresy today, and can you imagine how bold it was nearly 200 years ago? In 1846, Parker's admirers formed a new congregation just for him. They called it the 28th Congregational Society of Boston, and that is where his popularity grew even more, and literally thousands of people would come to hear him preach, for an hour nonetheless. Top-notch preaching level A. I wouldn't dream of trying to pull that one. You'd be gently throwing tomatoes at me, the Bronco fans sneaking out the back of the sanctuary. But multitudes flocked to hear Reverend Parker, to hear his free-thinking, reason-based exploration of theology, and he became a very important figure in the evolution of our faith. You see, our Unitarian and Universalist spiritual ancestors have always been the heretics. They were the ones who insisted on using reason to determine their interpretation of Scripture. Theodore Parker had the audacity to refer to God as mother and father, and he was one of the first preachers to openly preach on and support women's suffrage. His name is not particularly well known, but two of his ideas live on in our more mainstream popular culture. He first said that democracy was, quote, government of all the people, by all the people, for all the people, which we all know from President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, when Lincoln paraphrased Parker's words saying that democracy was a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Most people also don't realize that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. paraphrased the words of Reverend Parker in his famous I Have a Dream speech. It was Theodore Parker, the Unitarian minister, who first said, quote, I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one, my eye reaches but a little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I divine it by conscience, and from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice. Now at this point, you may be reaching for your tomatoes thinking, Reverend Jenny, you promised us a sermon on building beloved community this coming year at Columbine, and now you've gone on a tangent about Theodore Parker. But then you will realize and appreciate that the tangent wasn't about pigs or carriage horses, and maybe you will be glad for that. And alas, here is the connection I intend to make today. Theodore Parker preached about what is transient and what is permanent in our Unitarian faith, and still today his sermon on that subject and his articulation of this idea serves as a guide for our liberal religious future. You see, Reverend Parker was a rare breed of theologian, one that was both deeply religious, believing in the existence of God and the immortality of the soul, while at the same time he was not theologically conservative. Today, there are more people than you realize who fall into this category, though we don't always hear their voices as loudly in our mainstream culture. There are people who are deeply religious and faithful, but also theologically liberal, including my Christian seminary professors who are biblical scholars, but do not take the Bible literally. Reverend Alwyn, and our dear friends at Holy Redeemer, and Reverend Nadia Boltz-Weber. Liberal religion is alive and well, despite all the bad apples who give the idea of religious thought and belief a bad reputation. These are the roots of Unitarian Universalism, and Theodore Parker's passionate voice for social justice and political reform was rooted in his Christian faith and also in his embrace of reason and his value of making meaning with our lives. Parker's sermons and his writings have been described as a profoundly inspiring appeal to live a divine life. Not for the sake of avoiding hellfire, but for the sake of itself. And that is what leads me to consider the power of what we can do here at Columbine. How can we manifest a shared vision of beloved community, and how can that shared vision support the work of justice and healing in the wider community? I remember growing up Catholic and loving the song, "They will know we are Christians by our love." I loved that idea of people saying, wow, look at those folks over there. They actually live into their faith, and wondering, what is this thing that inspires them? Today I ask us to consider what it looks like when we live into the values of our UU faith. Do people know that we are UUs by our love? I think sometimes people do. People come to our UU faith communities and are invited to share their stories and their identities. People are invited to come as their whole selves. And sometimes we enthusiastically accept people for their whole selves, even the parts that aren't familiar to us or that we don't resonate with. And other times we don't live up to that. We don't accept people as their whole selves. Building beloved community is aspirational, and it's also action. There are so many ways that we have each been socialized to value certain identities over others. We don't even notice our microaggressions and our discrimination against others. But the people on the receiving end do notice. As a woman, I notice sexism. I notice ageism. This is why we have to keep learning together. This is why our Covenant Sundays will be action, and they will be continuing education, how to be anti-racist and anti-oppressive. We will continue to do the uncomfortable work of speaking up when we witness harmful words or actions, interrupting it. We will learn how to spot them. We will bear witness for each other and invite each other back into covenant. That's what we have been reflecting on this month, where our theme has been the gift of welcome. And that lifetime of never-ending task of learning how to decenter identities that we have been socialized to prefer and support is crucial. So this church year, as we begin our monthly Covenant Sundays, we will have some months where we might watch a film or read a book or have someone come in to speak to us about being anti-racist and anti-oppressive, about how we actually build beloved community. We will keep learning, and we won't be siloed into dismantling racism group, because the 8th principle is a call to every Unitarian Universalist, from babies to old folks and everyone in between. We are called to dream of a new world and then to learn how to make it so. To be willing to stretch ourselves out of our comfort zones in order to be truly welcoming and affirming to others. And this is where Reverend Parker's words beautifully call to us. As Reverend Greg articulated in our reading today, quote, Parker challenges us with each new generation to let go of what is transient, what has become obsolete, and to hold on to the permanency of the community, covenant, and convictions that seem right to us, as best we can see with the best of our current insights and knowledge. The best of our current insights and knowledge. That's how we roll here as UUs. We don't know the ultimate objective truth of the best way to be. Anybody who tells you they do, I would question that. We are explorers. We do our best, and we often learn that we got it wrong in the past. We continue to question what is permanent and what is transient. Theodore Parker thought that white people were superior to black people. Well, he was an abolitionist. His thinking was wrong. And as brilliant as he was, as forward-thinking and visionary and inspiring as he was, he had a long way to go. And that's the thing about our faith. We don't always live into our values, and we do get it wrong. Sometimes Unitarian Universalists cause hurt and harm to others. Each of us does. Sometimes we are well-intentioned, but our impact can be very harmful to others. Unitarians ran schools where Native American children were kidnapped, abused, and stripped of their language and culture, all with the best of Christian intentions. And here in our church, we have racism, sexism, ableism, ageism, prejudice. None of us are pure and above harmful words and actions. So it is from that humble place of accepting that we aren't there yet, that we commit to doing our best to create a world like Reverend Parker described in the song that we sing here as our closing song. Be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere, its temple all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works of love. May that which is permanent, the spirit of love and life that connects us all, guide us in our determination of what is transient. How can we be more loving towards one another? Are we willing to be uncomfortable, to try new things, to interact with different people, to receive a call back into covenant when people say to us, hey, that was harmful? How can we use Theodore Parker's vision of living a divine life to guide our actions both personally and as a church community? This year, as we progress into our church year, we have this little building, and we have about 100 people who are either members or friends of our church who show up regularly to help serve others. People who support the work of people fighting for their own liberation, and people working to learn to love one another. We have so many resources here. Open minds, open hearts, helping hands. And if we come together each month as a whole community and say, hey, Polly Murray Social Justice Coalition Center, how can we help? Or, hey, I just saw this amazing film that opened my mind to understanding how I can help others or our world better. Want to watch it together? In October, we will have an interdenominational worship service with our friends from Holy Redeemer who have agreed to come all the way out here from downtown for an interdenominational worship service and some relationship building time together with us. What an honor. In November, we'll be looking for a way to help others together. Be thinking about that. In December, some of us will spend Christmas Day distributing supplies and gifts for people experiencing homelessness in Denver. In January, we will share our learning about anti-racism and anti-oppression with Reverend Alwyn's Church of the Master parishioners. What else will we get up to? Will we join Joan Bratt in mentoring youth with first gun offenses to help them pick a better path? Will we work with Together Colorado to get compassionate and humane legislation passed in our local community? Will we show up and offer support, not take over, but offer support and follow the lead of people whose identities have been marginalized? How can the energy from our Dismantling Racism group and our Just Act experience over the years fuel something here that is larger than the sum of the parts? A little UU church in the suburbs of Denver that lives into our 8th principle in our long tradition of being committed to doing better, to taking some risks and putting ourselves out there for more learning, more relationship building, more willingness to mess up and feel the sting of discomfort and embarrassment when we mess up, and then get up and dust ourselves off and come back into this imperfect and love-guided space. As the old James Villa Blake Unitarian Covenant, written 130 years ago, reads, "Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Blessed be, and may it be so."